The title of the presentation is Algae, the Unexpected Obvious Evidence. So, through this presentation, I'll explain to you why and how the oceans and algae, in particular, are an essential resource to meet the food challenge of the 21st century. Maybe you know, but oceans have seen the birth of life on Earth and have contributed, thanks to algae, to its development on emerging continents. They cover more than 70% of the surface of our planet, and they contain 97% of the available water. They're also home to an animal and plant biomass which is estimated to 30 billion tons. And due to the very short life cycle of most of these species, the average annual production of this biomass is around 5,030 billion tons, which is to be compared with the 3.5 billion tons of food biomass, which is produced annually by agriculture. So, no doubt that with millions of animal, plants and microbial species, the sea is undoubtedly a great source of blue technology. Why? One of the facts is that algae are the fastest growing plants in nature. Please, next one. In fact, algae have an ability for some of the species to triple their biomass every day. That means that 1 acre of cultivated algae can produce annually the same amount of protein as 21 acres of soybeans or 50 acres of corn. And to do that, algae don't need arable water, lands or fresh water, which is very important for tomorrow. By doing this, algae also produce a lot of oxygen. They are the main provider of oxygen on Earth, roughly 70%. And like most of the living organisms, they produce a lot of things, and mainly sugars like polysaccharides, proteins, lipids, minerals, and fibers. So, when talking about algae, what are we talking about? We need some definitions. Algae, in fact, is a polyphyletic group of very different organisms, but which have in common some traits. The first one being the chlorophyll, with oxygenic photosynthesis. The life cycle of algae is generally realized in aquatic or humid environments, and mainly salted water. Algae don't have roots, nor flowers, nor seeds. And the size varies from 0.5 micrometer to 70 meter. This group of algae include both prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms. The prokaryotic organisms are the blue-green algae, which are in fact the first photosynthetic organisms which appear on Earth roughly 3 billion years ago. And the eukaryotics means organisms with nucleus, divided in microalgae, which are very small, unicellular organisms, and the macroalgae, which are multicellular. So, when talking about algae, there is an English word which is very easy, which is the seaweed. What are seaweeds? Seaweeds are specific algae which are microscopic, multicellular, and marine. And in this group of seaweeds, we have 3 main families, which are the green, the red, and the brown algae. And the green are in fact the ancestors of the terrestrial plants. So we start with the oldest one, the green seaweeds, which are, as I told you before, the ancestors of the terrestrial plants. They are roughly 1.5 billion years old, and there are some common traits in between themselves. The first one is the color, the green color, which is due to the presence of chlorophyll A and B. And one other very specific point, which is the type of polysaccharides that we find in those seaweeds, which is in green seaweeds, the ulvans. The second family is the family of the red seaweeds. They are a sister group of the plants and the green seaweeds on the same branch of the evolution. They are roughly 1.2 billion years old. In fact, their color, the red color, is due to the phycoerythrin and phycocyanin, which are accessory pigments to the chlorophyll. And in the red seaweeds, we find specific types of sugars, specific polysaccharides, which are the carrageenan and agar. So the next one is the family of the brown seaweeds. It's a quite recent group of seaweeds, only 150 million years old, if we can say so. And their specific color is due to some accessory pigments to chlorophylls, which are the fucoxanthin pigments. And the same as the other seaweeds family, the polysaccharides which we find in brown seaweeds are also specifics, and they are composed of mainly alginates and fucoidans and laminarins. When talking about seaweeds, we could consider that those plants are quite primitives, but in fact seaweeds have a unique type of metabolisms, and which are able to produce very diverse and unique chemical compounds. And starting with only the photosynthesis from the CO2 and the nitrogen from the atmosphere, those organisms are able to produce quite simple molecules, like, can you press the button? Yes, like basic sugars and amino acids, but also some more sophisticated molecules like glycosides. Can you press the button? Yes, and specific protein and enzymes, but also very, very specific molecules, quite complicated structure that can be found only in seaweeds. Like in many other organisms, we find common molecules like protein, sugars, lipids, and of course minerals. But what makes the specificity of seaweeds is mainly the sugars, the polysaccharides, which can represent up to 70% of the dry weight. And what is interesting is that those sugars, the polysaccharides that can be found in seaweeds, are very, very specific and unique and can't be found in other plants or organisms. And mainly for the brown seaweeds, alginate and fucoidans, for the red seaweeds, the carrageenan and agar, and for the green seaweeds, the ulvans. And they are a source of a lot of specific properties, and especially rheological properties, but also a lot of different biological activities. But if you can come back, please. What is also interesting is also that they contains a lot of different types of molecules. And when talking about the proteins, they are also a very good source of amino acids because of a specific balanced composition of the proteins in the seaweeds. Also specific lipids. Most of the lipids present in seaweeds are long-chain fatty acids, and which have a lot of biological activities. And also the presence of very diverse minerals and trace elements, which represent, in fact, the variety of elements that can be found in the environment, their environment, which is the sea. Because seaweeds are used mainly in human food as a vegetable. The second use that you know is the use of those seaweeds due to their texturizing properties, the food additives that are alginate, agar and carrageenan. Some of the use are as a nutritional supplement for the presence of protein, minerals and vitamins. The second important use of seaweeds is the industry, and especially the textile industry, once again using the rheological properties of the seaweed, which are the thickening, gelling or stabilizing properties. And a small part of the use of the seaweeds today is the use in the fine chemistry, in cosmetics and pharmacy. To summarize it, we know today that the main use of seaweeds is in the food, roughly 65%. The second use is also in food, but also in industry as colloids, and a small part of it is used in fine chemistry. So this slide is to show you the versatility of the polysaccharides that can be found in seaweeds. And this is the example of what we can find in red seaweeds, red algae. And red seaweeds contains mostly carrageenan. And you can see that depending on the chemical composition and the structure of the carrageenan, we have different types of carrageenan, kappa, iota, lambda. And then depending on the composition of the carrageenan in the seaweeds, we have different properties which can be gellifying, thickening or stabilizing, depending on the proportion of each of those carrageenan. Most of the carrageenan are soluble in water, but the solubility depends mainly on the presence of sulfate on the carrageenan. And you can see that the kappa carrageenan, which has only one sulfate, is much less soluble than instead lambda carrageenan, which has 3 sulfation on each structure. The presence of the specific binding on the sugar, the bridge, which is called the 3,6-anhydro-D bridge, can also offer the structure the possibility to modify its structure and to form gels depending on the presence or absence of cations or anions in the environment. So a lot of those properties depend on the proportion of each of the sugars, and that means that depending on this proportion you can get some specific properties like gellification or for instance the formation of gels or the control of the water availability in the environment, which gives what we call the synergesis control. And to do that, when you formulate a product, you need to know what you want to do. And you can see on this slide that depending on the type of red seaweed that you use, you have different types of composition in the presence of the carrageenan. And so you can use one specific type of red seaweed, or you can use a mix depending on what you want to get in terms of rheological properties. So seaweed's solution for a better life, of course, as you can understand, by using seaweeds we use organisms which have very specific properties, and depending on the composition of what you extract from the seaweeds, you can get some rheological properties, and we can say controlled by the use of those sulfated polysaccharides, which are the alginates, which are the agar, carrageenan or ulvans, to form specific hydrocolloid and to get some properties in gel suspension and or AW control. But we also know today that seaweeds get a lot of biological properties due to presence of specific polysaccharides, also because of the presence and variety of trace elements, specific essential amino acids, specific fatty acids on specific fibers, which, as you can see on the slide, can provide different biological properties biostimulation, immune defense, antioxidant, antibacterial, antiviral, anti-stress, and so on. So, by the use of seaweeds, we can serve the whole food chain.